What would you do if you walked into a store and were treated like you didn't belong, like you were less than human, just because of the color of your skin? What if the person doing it had no idea you were the one person who could change their life forever? This is a story about justice, courage, and the power of standing up against racism. But before we dive in, make sure to like and subscribe to this channel, because what you're about to hear will shock you to your core. This is the story of how an undercover black CEO caught a racist store manager red-handed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Darius Carter stepped into the upscale furniture store. He adjusted the collar of his plain black hoodie and glanced around the showroom. The place smelled like polished wood and expensive leather, a stark contrast to the tension brewing in his chest. Darius wasn't here to shop. He was here to expose something far darker than the mahogany tables on display. Just moments earlier, Darius had been sitting in his luxury SUV parked across the street, watching the store through tinted windows. He'd received an anonymous tip a week ago. A former employee had reached out to him, claiming the store manager, a man named Brad, was racially profiling customers. Black customers in particular were being followed, ignored, or outright disrespected. Darius, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar retail chain, couldn't ignore it. He had to see it for himself. Now, as he walked through the store, he noticed the employee's eyes tracking him. A young white couple browsing a sofa set was greeted warmly by a sales associate. Darius, on the other hand, was met with cold stares. He approached a sleek dining table, running his fingers over the smooth surface. "Can I help you?" a voice called out. It wasn't friendly. It was sharp, almost accusatory. Darius turned to see a middle-aged man in a crisp white shirt and tie walking toward him. His name tag read Brad, the manager. Darius forced a polite smile. "Just looking around," he said casually. Brad's eyes narrowed. "We have a lot of high-end items here. Are you sure you're in the right place?" The words hit Darius like a slap. He clenched his fists inside his hoodie pockets, but kept his expression neutral. "Yeah, I'm sure. Just browsing." Brad didn't leave. He hovered nearby, his eyes darting to Darius every few seconds. Darius could feel the weight of the man's suspicion. It was suffocating. He moved to another section of the store, pretending to examine a leather recliner. Brad followed, maintaining a careful distance but never taking his eyes off him. Darius's heart pounded. He'd experienced racism before, but this was different. This was deliberate, blatant, and infuriating. He wanted to confront Brad right then and there, but he knew he had to stay calm. This wasn't just about him. It was about every person who had ever walked into this store and been made to feel unwelcome because of their skin color. As Darius continued his shopping, he noticed something else. A young black woman had entered the store. She was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, her hair in neat braids. Almost immediately, Brad's attention shifted to her. He abandoned Darius and approached her with the same cold demeanor. "Can I help you?" Brad asked, his tone dripping with condescension. The woman smiled politely. "I'm just looking for a new couch. Do you have any recommendations?" Brad crossed his arms. "Our couches start at $2,000. Are you sure that's within your budget?" The woman's smile faltered. "I'd like to see what you have, please." Brad sighed loudly, as if her request was a burden. "Fine. Follow me." Darius watched as Brad led the woman to a section of the store with cheaper, lower-quality furniture. The contrast was stark. The white couple from earlier was now sitting on a plush sectional, laughing with a sales associate. The black woman was being steered toward a flimsy, outdated sofa. Darius's blood boiled. He couldn't stay silent any longer. He walked over to Brad and the woman, his heart racing. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Why are you showing her these options when there's clearly better furniture in the store?" Brad turned to him, his face red with anger. "This is none of your business. If you're not here to buy anything, I suggest you leave." The woman looked at Darius, her eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. Darius held Brad's gaze, his jaw tight. "Oh, I'm here to buy something," he said. "But not furniture." Brad's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" Darius reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a small badge. It wasn't a police badge. It was something far more powerful. The words CEO were engraved in bold letters. Brad's face went pale. "My name is Darius Carter," Darius said, his voice steady. "I'm the CEO of Carter Retail Group, and I own this store." Brad's mouth opened, but no words came out. The woman gasped. The entire store seemed to freeze. Darius took a step closer to Brad, his eyes blazing. "You've been treating customers differently based on the color of their skin. That ends today." Brad stammered. I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" Darius interrupted. "That I was black? That I was your boss? Or that racism has no place in my company?" The room was silent. Even the white couple had stopped laughing and were staring at the scene unfolding before them. Darius turned to the woman. "I'm sorry for the way you were treated. Please, let me personally assist you in finding the perfect couch." The woman nodded, still in shock. Darius gestured for her to follow him, leaving Brad standing there, his career crumbling around him. But this was only the beginning. Darius knew there was more to uncover. As he walked away with the woman, he glanced back at Brad. The manager's face was a mix of fear and anger. Darius could tell this wasn't over. Brad wasn't going to go down without a fight. And that's when Darius noticed something else. Brad was reaching for his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed a number. Who was he calling? What was he planning? Darius didn't know, but he had a sinking feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. Brad's trembling fingers hovered over his phone as he dialed a number, his eyes darting nervously toward Darius and the woman he was now assisting. The store was eerily quiet, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Darius noticed Brad's movements out of the corner of his eye, but didn't react immediately. He had a job to do, helping the young woman find the couch she deserved. "This one here is part of our premium collection," Darius said, gesturing to a sleek, modern sectional. "It's comfortable, durable, and comes with a lifetime warranty. Let me know if you'd like to test it out." The woman, whose name was Keisha, smiled gratefully. "Thank you so much. I can't believe you're doing this for me." Darius returned her smile. "It's the least I can do. No one should be treated the way you were." Meanwhile, Brad had stepped into a back office, his voice low but frantic as he spoke into the phone. "You're not going to believe this," he hissed. "The CEO just showed up here. He's black, and he's undercover. He caught me red-handed." The person on the other end of the line responded, but their words were muffled. Brad's face grew paler by the second. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "If he fires me, I'm ruined. You have to help me." Back in the showroom, Darius was doing his best to focus on Keisha, but his mind was racing. He knew Brad was up to something, and he couldn't let it slide. After helping Keisha finalize her purchase, Darius handed her his business card. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you for your patience today." Keisha nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. You made a huge difference." As Keisha left the store, Darius turned his attention to the employees, who were now whispering among themselves. He could feel their unease, their fear of what was coming next. But before he could address them, Brad emerged from the back office, his face flushed and his hands shaking. "Mr. Carter," Brad said, his voice trembling. "Can we talk? In private?" Darius crossed his arms, his expression stern. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it right here. I think everyone deserves to hear it." Brad hesitated, his eyes darting around the room. The employees had stopped whispering and were now staring at him, waiting for his next move. Finally, Brad took a deep breath and said, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have treated those customers the way I did. I'm sorry." Darius raised an eyebrow. "A mistake? What you did wasn't a mistake, Brad. It was a choice to discriminate, to judge people based on the color of their skin. That's not something I can overlook." Brad's face turned red with anger. "You don't understand. This store isn't a tough neighborhood. I was just trying to protect our merchandise." "Protect it from who?" Darius shot back. "From black customers? From people who look like me? That's not protection, Brad. That's prejudice." The room fell silent again. The employees looked at each other, unsure of what to do or say. Darius took a step closer to Brad, his voice calm but firm. "Effective immediately. You're suspended pending an investigation. I'll be reviewing the store's security footage and speaking with every employee. If what I suspect is true, you won't just lose your job. You'll face legal consequences." Brad's eyes widened in panic. You can't do this. I've been with this company for 10 years. And in those 10 years, how many people have you treated unfairly? Darius asked. How many customers have walked out of here feeling humiliated and disrespected? This isn't just about you, Brad. It's about accountability. Brad opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. He knew he was defeated. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the store, slamming the door behind him. Darius let out a deep breath and turned to the employees. I know this is a lot to process, but I need you all to be honest with me. Has anyone else witnessed or experienced discrimination in this store? The employees exchanged nervous glances. Finally, a young woman named Emily spoke up. It's not just Brad, she said quietly. It's the whole culture here. Some of the other managers do it too. They think it's normal. Darius nodded, his heart heavy. Thank you for speaking up, Emily. I promise you, things are going to change. Starting today, this store will be a place where everyone is treated with respect, no matter who they are. The employees nodded, some of them visibly relieved. But Darius knew this was just the beginning. He had a lot of work to do, and he couldn't do it alone. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Hey, it's me, he said when the call connected. I need you to assemble a team. We've got a situation here, and it's bigger than I thought. As Darius ended the call, he noticed something strange. One of the security cameras in the corner of the store was tilted at an odd angle, as if someone had tampered with it. His stomach churned. What were they trying to hide? Before he could investigate further, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number, and the words sent a chill down his spine. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you're up against. Watch your back. Darius stared at the message, his mind racing. Who sent this? Was it Brad? Or was there someone else involved? He didn't have time to think about it, though, because at that moment, the store's fire alarm went off, blaring loudly through the building. Everyone evacuate, Darius shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. The employees scrambled toward the exits, their faces filled with panic. As Darius followed them out, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was no accident. Someone was trying to send him a message, a warning. And if he didn't figure out who it was, things were about to get a lot worse. The fire alarm blared through the store, its shrill sound echoing in Darius's ears as he ushered the employees outside. Smoke began to seep from the back of the building, thick and black, curling into the air like a sinister warning. Darius's heart pounded as he scanned the crowd, making sure everyone had made it out safely. But his mind was racing. This wasn't an accident. Someone had set off that alarm and possibly started that fire to send him a message. As the employees gathered on the sidewalk, their faces pale with fear, Darius pulled out his phone and dialed 911. There's a fire at Carter's Furniture on Main Street, he said urgently. We've evacuated the building, but we need the fire department here immediately. While he waited for help to arrive, Darius turned to Emily, the employee who had spoken up earlier. Did you see anything suspicious before the alarm went off? He asked. Emily shook her head, her hands trembling. No, everything seemed normal. But I did see Brad leaving in a hurry right after you suspended him. He looked really angry. Darius frowned. Brad was definitely a suspect, but something about this felt bigger than one disgruntled manager. The text message he'd received earlier flashed in his mind. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you're up against. Watch your back. Whoever sent that knew what they were doing, and they weren't working alone. The sound of sirens filled the air as fire trucks and police cars pulled up to the scene. Darius stepped aside to let the firefighters do their job, but he kept a close eye on everything. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to stop until he got them. Once the fire was under control, a police officer approached Darius. Mr. Carter, we'll need to ask you a few questions. Can you tell us what happened? Darius nodded. I was inside the store with my employees when the fire alarm went off. We evacuated immediately, but I believe this was intentional. Someone set that fire to intimidate me. The officer raised an eyebrow. Intimidate you? Why would someone do that? Darius hesitated. He wasn't ready to reveal everything just yet. It's a long story, he said, but I'm happy to cooperate with your investigation. In the meantime, I need to make sure my employees are safe. The officer nodded. We'll do everything we can to find out who's responsible. In the meantime, I'd advise you to be careful. If someone's targeting you, they might try again. Darius thanked the officer and turned his attention back to his employees. They were shaken but unharmed, and he knew he needed to reassure them. "Everyone, listen up," he said, raising his voice to be heard over the commotion. "I know this has been a terrifying experience, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. We're going to get through this together. For now, go home and get some rest. The store will be closed until further notice." As the employees began to disperse, Darius pulled Emily aside. "I need your help," he said quietly. "You've been honest with me so far, and I appreciate that. But I need to know more about what's been happening here. Who else is involved in this culture of discrimination?" Emily bit her lip, clearly nervous. "It's not just Brad," she said after a moment. "There's a group of managers who've been doing this for years. They think they're untouchable. And there's someone higher up, someone who protects them." Darius's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Emily shook her head. "I don't know their name, but I've heard them talking about the boss. They said as long as he's in charge, nothing will change." Darius felt a chill run down his spine. If there was someone higher up involved, this was much bigger than he'd thought. He needed to dig deeper, but he had to be careful. Whoever was behind this was clearly willing to go to extreme lengths to protect their secrets. As Darius left the scene, his phone buzzed again. Another text from the same unknown number. "You should have stayed out of this. Now you're going to regret it." Darius clenched his fists, his jaw tight. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. But as he got into his car and drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Later that evening, Darius sat in his home office, reviewing security footage from the store. He fast-forwarded through hours of tape, looking for anything suspicious. Finally, he found it, a shadowy figure entering the store after hours, just a few hours before the fire. The person moved quickly, their face obscured by a hoodie. But there was something familiar about the way they walked, something that made Darius's blood run cold. He rewound the footage and watched it again, his heart pounding. Then it hit him. The figure wasn't just familiar. It was someone he knew, someone he trusted. Before he could process what he'd just seen, his doorbell rang. Darius froze. It was late, too late for visitors. He grabbed his phone and cautiously made his way to the front door. Through the peephole, he saw a figure standing on his porch, their face hidden in the shadows. "Who is it?" Darius called out, his voice steady despite the fear creeping up his spine. The figure didn't respond. Instead, they reached into their pocket and pulled out something small and metallic. Darius's eyes widened as he realized what it was, a gun. Before he could react, the figure raised the weapon and fired. To be continued. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the night, shattering the silence like a thunderclap. Darius instinctively ducked, his heart racing as the bullet tore through the door, missing him by inches. He scrambled away from the entrance, his mind racing. Who was out there? And why were they trying to kill him? The figure on the porch didn't stick around. Darius heard the sound of footsteps running down the driveway, followed by the roar of an engine as a car sped away. He stayed low, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. It took him a moment to gather his thoughts, but he knew he couldn't stay there. Whoever had just tried to kill him might come back. Darius grabbed his phone and dialed 911, his hands trembling. "Someone just shot at my house," he said, his voice shaking. "I need the police here right now." While he waited for the authorities to arrive, Darius replayed the security footage in his mind. The shadowy figure from the store, the way they moved, it was someone he knew, someone he trusted. But who? And why would they want him dead? The police arrived within minutes, their sirens wailing as they pulled up to the house. Darius met them at the door, his face pale but determined. "They're gone," he said, "but they shot through the door. I think they were trying to send me a message." The officers took his statement and examined the bullet hole in the door. "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" one of them asked. Darius hesitated. He didn't want to reveal too much, not yet. "I've been dealing with some issues at work," he said carefully. "Someone doesn't want me digging into what's been going on, but I don't have any proof yet." The officer nodded. "We'll increase patrols in the area, but I'd advise you to be careful. If someone's willing to go this far, they're dangerous." After the police left, Darius locked the door and sat down on the couch, his mind racing. He couldn't stay here. It wasn't safe, but he also couldn't run. He had to see this through, no matter the cost. The next morning, Darius arrived at his corporate office early, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He had a plan, but it was risky. He needed to confront the person he'd seen in the security footage. The person he now suspected was behind everything. As he walked into the building, he was greeted by his assistant, Lisa. "Mr. Carter, you're here early," she said, her tone cheerful as always. "Is everything okay?" Darius forced a smile. "Just a lot on my mind. Can you pull up the employee records for the Main Street store? I need to review them." Lisa nodded and quickly brought up the files on her computer. Darius scanned the names, his eyes stopping on one in particular, Ryan Mitchell. Ryan was one of the store's senior managers, and he'd been with the company for over a decade. He was also the person Darius had recognized in the security footage. Darius's stomach churned. Ryan had always been loyal, or so he'd thought. But if he was involved in this, it meant the corruption ran deeper than Darius had imagined. "Lisa, can you schedule a meeting with Ryan for me?" Darius asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "I need to speak with him as soon as possible." Lisa nodded and began typing on her computer. "Of course, Mr. Carter. I'll let you know as soon as it's confirmed." As Darius walked to his office, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The text messages, the fire, the shooting, it all pointed to someone who knew his every move. And if Ryan was involved, that meant the danger was closer than he'd thought. Later that afternoon, Ryan arrived at the corporate office, his expression calm, but his eyes betraying a hint of nervousness. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Carter?" he asked as he stepped into Darius's office. Darius gestured for him to sit. "Yes, Ryan. Close the door, please." Ryan did as he was told, his movements slow and deliberate. Darius studied him carefully, trying to gauge his reaction. "I've been reviewing some security footage from the Main Street store," Darius began. "And I noticed something interesting. Someone was in the store after hours, just before the fire. Do you know anything about that?" Ryan's face remained neutral, but Darius noticed the slight twitch in his jaw. "No, I don't," Ryan said. "I wasn't there after hours. Maybe it was a cleaning crew." Darius leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "It wasn't a cleaning crew, Ryan. It was you." Ryan's mask of calm cracked, just for a moment. But then he smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent a chill down Darius's spine. "You're a smart man, Mr. Carter," Ryan said. "But you're in over your head. You should have stayed out of this." Darius's heart pounded, but he kept his voice steady. "What are you talking about, Ryan? What's really going on here?" Ryan stood up, his smile fading. "You think you could just waltz in here and change everything? You have no idea what you're up against. This isn't just about one store. It's about power, and you're standing in the way." Before Darius could respond, Ryan turned and walked out of the office, leaving Darius sitting there, his mind racing. He knew now that this was bigger than he'd ever imagined. But he also knew he couldn't back down. Not now. As Darius sat there, his phone buzzed with another text message. This time, it wasn't from an unknown number. It was from Ryan. "You've been warned. Next time I won't miss." Darius stared at the message, his hands trembling. He knew what he had to do. He had to take this fight to the next level, no matter the cost. But as he stood up to leave, his office door burst open. Two men in black suits walked in, their faces grim. "Mr. Carter," one of them said, "we need you to come with us." Darius's heart skipped a beat. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out a badge. It wasn't a police badge. It was something far more ominous. The words "Internal Affairs" were engraved in bold letters. Darius's stomach dropped. This wasn't just about racism or corruption. This was about something much darker. And he was about to find out just how deep the rabbit hole went. Darius stared at the badge in the man's hand, his mind racing. Internal Affairs? What did they want with him? And why now? Before he could ask any questions, the man in the black suit spoke again, his voice cold and authoritative. "Mr. Carter, we need you to come with us." This isn't a request. Darius hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to be cautious. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. The man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped aside and gestured toward the door. "We'll explain everything once we get to the office. But for now, you need to come with us. Quietly, Darius knew he didn't have a choice. If these men were really from internal affairs, refusing to cooperate would only make things worse. He grabbed his jacket and followed them out of the office, his mind spinning with questions. As they walked through the building, employees stared at them, their faces filled with confusion and concern. Darius avoided their gazes, his jaw tight. He couldn't afford to show weakness, not now. The men led him to a black SUV parked outside. One of them opened the back door, and Darius climbed in, his heart pounding. The drive was silent, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. Darius stared out the window, trying to piece together what was happening. But the more he thought about it, the less sense it made. Finally, the SUV pulled up to a nondescript office building on the outskirts of the city. The men led Darius inside and down a series of hallways until they reached a small, dimly lit room. A single table and 2 chairs sat in the center, and a camera was mounted in the corner, its red light blinking ominously. "Sit," one of the men said, gesturing to the chair. Darius sat down, his eyes scanning the room. "What's going on?" he demanded. "Why am I here?" The man ignored him and walked out, closing the door behind him. Darius was left alone in the room, the silence pressing down on him like a weight. He didn't know how long he sat there, but it felt like an eternity before the door finally opened again. A woman walked in, her sharp features and piercing gaze giving her an air of authority. She sat down across from Darius and placed a file on the table. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm Agent Collins with Internal Affairs. We need to ask you a few questions." Darius crossed his arms, his expression defiant. "About what?" Agent Collins opened the file and slid a photograph across the table. It was a picture of Ryan Mitchell, the senior manager Darius had confronted earlier. "Do you know this man?" she asked. Darius nodded. "Yes, he's one of my employees." "Why?" Agent Collins studied him carefully, as if trying to gauge his reaction. "Ryan Mitchell is under investigation for corruption, embezzlement, and ties to organized crime. We believe he's been using your company as a front for illegal activities." Darius's eyes widened. "What? That's impossible. I would have known." "Would you?" Agent Collins interrupted. "Because from what we've seen, Mr. Mitchell has been very good at covering his tracks. And he's not working alone. There's a network of people involved, both inside and outside your company." Darius's mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. The discrimination, the fire, the shooting, it was all connected. Ryan wasn't just a racist manager. He was part of something much bigger, and Darius had unknowingly stumbled into the middle of it. "Why are you telling me this?" Darius asked. "What do you want from me?" Agent Collins leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "We want your help, Mr. Carter. Ryan Mitchell trusts you, or at least he did. If you're willing to cooperate, we can bring him down. But it's going to be dangerous. These people don't play by the rules." Darius hesitated. He wanted justice, but he wasn't sure he was ready to risk his life for it. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "We need you to go undercover," Agent Collins said. "Gather evidence, gain Ryan's trust, and help us take down the entire operation. But you need to understand, if you agree to this, there's no turning back. These people won't hesitate to kill you if they find out what you're doing." Darius sat back in his chair, his mind reeling. This was bigger than he'd ever imagined. But he also knew he couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. "I'll do it," he said finally, his voice firm. "But on one condition. I want immunity for any of my employees who were coerced into this. They didn't know what they were getting into." Agent Collins nodded. "We can work with that. But you need to understand, this isn't going to be easy. You'll be in constant danger. One wrong move, and it's over." Darius nodded, his jaw tight. "I understand." Agent Collins stood up and handed him a small device. "This is a wire. Keep it on you at all times. We'll be listening, and we'll have your back. But you need to be careful. Ryan Mitchell is dangerous, and he's not the only one." As Darius took the wire, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. But he also knew he didn't have a choice. This was his chance to make things right, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been hurt by Ryan and his associates. Later that evening, Darius returned to his office, his mind still spinning from everything he'd learned. He knew he had to act fast, but he also had to be careful. One misstep, and it could all come crashing down. As he sat at his desk, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Ryan. "We need to talk. Meet me at the warehouse on 5th Street. Come alone." Darius stared at the message, his heart pounding. This was it, the moment of truth. He grabbed the wire and attached it to his shirt, his hands trembling slightly. He knew this could be a trap, but he also knew he had to take the risk. As he left the office and headed to the warehouse, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sound the echo of his footsteps on the pavement. When he reached the warehouse, he took a deep breath and pushed open the door. Inside, the warehouse was dark and empty, the only light coming from a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. Ryan stood in the center of the room, his arms crossed and a cold smile on his face. "You came," Ryan said. "I wasn't sure you would." Darius stepped forward, his heart racing. "You wanted to talk. So talk." Ryan's smile faded, replaced by a look of pure malice. "You should have stayed out of this, Darius. But since you didn't, I'm going to make sure you regret it." Before Darius could respond, the door behind him slammed shut. He turned around just in time to see two men step out of the shadows, their faces masked and their hands gripping metal pipes. Darius's stomach dropped. He was trapped. The sound of the doors slamming shut echoed through the warehouse, sending a chill down Darius's spine. He turned to face the two masked men, their eyes cold and unfeeling as they tightened their grips on the metal pipes. Ryan stood behind them, his arms crossed and a smug smile on his face. "You really thought you could take me down, Darius?" Ryan said, his voice dripping with mockery. "You're just one man, and now you're out of your depth." Darius's mind raced. He knew he was in danger, but he also knew he couldn't show fear. Not now, not when so much was at stake. He took a step back, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape route. But the warehouse was empty, the only exit blocked by Ryan and his thugs. "You're making a mistake, Ryan," Darius said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. "This isn't just about you and me. It's about justice. And you can't stop that." Ryan laughed, a harsh, grating sound that filled the room. "Justice? You think this is about justice? This is about power, Darius. And you're standing in the way." The two masked men stepped forward, their pipes raised. Darius knew he had to act fast. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, pretending to check the time. But what he was really doing was activating the panic button on the wire Agent Collins had given him. It was a long shot, but it was his only hope. "You're not going to win, Ryan," Darius said, stalling for time. "You can't keep this up forever. Sooner or later, someone's going to stop you." Ryan's smile faded, replaced by a look of pure rage. "Enough talk," he snarled. "Take him." The two men lunged at Darius, their pipes swinging through the air. Darius ducked just in time, the metal whistling past his head. He grabbed a nearby wooden pallet and swung it at one of the men, catching him in the chest and sending him stumbling backward. But the other man was faster. He swung his pipe, and this time, Darius wasn't quick enough. The pipe connected with his side, sending a searing pain through his body. Darius gasped and dropped to one knee, clutching his ribs. The masked man raised the pipe again, ready to strike, but before he could, the sound of sirens filled the air. Ryan's head snapped toward the door, his eyes wide with panic. "What the?" The warehouse doors burst open, and a swarm of police officers rushed in, their guns drawn. "Freeze!" one of them shouted. "Drop your weapons." The two masked men hesitated, their eyes darting between the police and Ryan. Finally, they dropped the pipes and raised their hands. Ryan, however, wasn't ready to give up. He turned and bolted toward a side door, his footsteps echoing through the warehouse. "Stop him!" Darius shouted, struggling to his feet. "He's getting away!" Two officers chased after Ryan, but he was fast. He slammed the door shut behind him, and by the time the officers reached it, he was gone. Darius leaned against a nearby crate, his side throbbing with pain. Agent Collins walked over to him, her expression a mix of concern and frustration. "Are you okay?" she asked. Darius nodded, wincing as he straightened up. "I'll live, but Ryan got away." Agent Collins sighed. We'll find him. But for now, we need to get you out of here. You're lucky we got your signal when we did. Darius managed a weak smile. Yeah, lucky. As the police handcuffed the two masked men and led them away, Darius couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. He'd survived barely, but he also knew this wasn't over. Ryan was still out there, and he wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. Later that night, Darius sat in a hospital bed, his side bandaged and his mind racing. Agent Collins had filled him in on what they'd found so far. Ryan's operation was bigger than they'd thought, with ties to organized crime and a network of corrupt employees. But without Ryan, they didn't have enough evidence to bring it all down. Darius knew he had to keep going. He couldn't let Ryan win, but he also knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed help, someone he could trust. As he lay there, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Emily, the employee who had spoken up earlier. I heard what happened. Are you okay? Darius hesitated, then typed a reply. I'm alive, but I need your help. Can you meet me tomorrow? Emily's response came quickly. Of course. Just tell me where and when. Darius smiled faintly. At least he wasn't completely alone in this. But as he put his phone down, he couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan was still out there, watching and waiting. The next morning, Darius met Emily at a small cafe downtown. She looked nervous but determined as she sat down across from him. What's going on? She asked. And why do you look like you've been through a war? Darius chuckled despite the pain in his side. It's a long story, but I need your help. Ryan's still out there, and I need to find him before he does something worse. Emily nodded, her expression serious. What do you need me to do? Darius leaned forward, lowering his voice. I need you to keep your eyes and ears open at the store. If you hear anything at all, let me know. But be careful. Ryan's dangerous, and he's not working alone. Emily nodded again, her jaw set. I'll do whatever it takes. But you need to promise me something. What's that? Darius asked. Promise me you'll be careful, Emily said, her eyes filled with concern. I don't want to lose another good person to this mess. Darius smiled faintly. I promise. As they left the cafe, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He scanned the street, his eyes darting from face to face, but he didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Still, the feeling lingered, a constant reminder that Ryan was still out there, and he wasn't done yet. That night, as Darius lay in bed, his phone buzzed again. It was another text message, this time from an unknown number. You think you're safe. You're not. I'm coming for you. Darius stared at the message, his heart pounding. He knew Ryan wasn't bluffing. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Darius stared at the text message, his heart pounding in his chest. The words on the screen seemed to taunt him. You think you're safe. You're not. I'm coming for you. He knew Ryan wasn't bluffing. The man was desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. Darius quickly forwarded the message to Agent Collins, along with a brief note. Ryan's still out there. He's threatening me. We need to move fast. Within minutes, his phone buzzed with a response. We're on it. Stay alert and keep your location secure. We'll send a team to your house. Darius nodded to himself, but he knew he couldn't just sit around and wait. He had to take action. He grabbed his jacket and headed out the door, his mind racing with plans. If Ryan was coming for him, he needed to be ready. As he drove through the city, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. He glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes scanning the cars behind him. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but the paranoia was eating at him. He took a few extra turns just to be safe before finally pulling into the parking lot of a small, nondescript diner. Inside, Emily was already waiting for him, her face pale with worry. What's going on? She asked as soon as he sat down. You sounded really freaked out on the phone. Darius took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. Ryan's still out there. He sent me a threatening text. I think he's planning something big. Emily's eyes widened. What are we going to do? We need to find him before he finds us, Darius said, his voice low. I've been thinking. Ryan's not working alone. There's someone higher up pulling the strings. If we can figure out who that is, we might be able to stop him. Emily nodded, her expression determined. I've been asking around at the store. Some of the employees are scared, but a few of them might be willing to talk. I think I can get more information. Darius smiled faintly. "You're a lifesaver, Emily. But be careful. If Ryan finds out you're helping me, he'll come after you too." Emily shrugged, trying to look brave. "I'm not scared of him. Not anymore." As they talked, Darius couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Emily was smart and resourceful, and she had a way of getting people to open up. If anyone could help him uncover the truth, it was her. But as they left the diner and stepped out into the night, that hope was quickly overshadowed by a sense of dread. The street was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. Darius scanned the area, his instincts on high alert. "Let's get out of here," he said, his voice tense. "I don't like the feel of this." Emily nodded, and they hurried to Darius's car. But just as they reached it, a loud crash echoed through the air. Darius spun around, his heart racing, just in time to see a black SUV speeding toward them. "Get down," he shouted, pulling Emily to the ground as the SUV screeched to a halt beside them. The doors flew open, and two men jumped out, their faces masked and their hands gripping guns. Darius's mind raced. He had no weapons, no way to defend himself. But he couldn't let them take Emily. He grabbed her hand and pulled her to her feet. "Run," he shouted, pushing her toward the diner. The masked men opened fire, the sound of gunshots ringing through the air. Darius ducked behind a parked car, his heart pounding as bullets ricocheted off the metal. He glanced over his shoulder and saw Emily disappear into the diner. At least she was safe. But he wasn't. The masked men were closing in, their guns trained on him. Darius knew he had to think fast. He spotted a narrow alleyway a few feet away and made a split-second decision. He bolted toward it, his legs pumping as fast as they could. The alley was dark and cluttered with trash, but Darius didn't care. He just needed to get away. He could hear the men behind him, their footsteps pounding against the pavement. He turned a corner, then another, trying to lose them in the maze of alleys. Finally, he spotted a fire escape and scrambled up it, his hands slipping on the cold metal. He reached the roof and crouched behind a ventilation unit, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Below, he could hear the men shouting to each other, their voices filled with frustration. Darius pulled out his phone and dialed Agent Collins's number, his hands trembling. "I'm on the roof of a building near the diner," he whispered. "Ryan's men are after me. I need help." "Hold on, Darius," Agent Collins said, her voice calm but urgent. "We're on our way. Just stay hidden." Darius nodded, even though she couldn't see him. He stayed low, his eyes scanning the rooftop for any sign of the men. But as the minutes ticked by, the sounds below grew quieter. Had they given up? Or were they just waiting for him to come down? Suddenly, a voice cut through the silence. "Darius!" It was Ryan, his voice filled with rage. "I know you're up there. You can't hide from me forever." Darius's heart skipped a beat. He peered over the edge of the roof and saw Ryan standing in the alley below, a gun in his hand. His face was twisted with anger, his eyes blazing. "You think you're so smart," Ryan snarled. "But you're just a dead man walking. Come down here, and I'll make it quick." Darius didn't respond. He knew Ryan was trying to bait him, but he wasn't going to fall for it. He stayed hidden, his mind racing. Where was Agent Collins? He couldn't hold out much longer. Just as Ryan started climbing the fire escape, the sound of sirens filled the air. Ryan froze, his eyes widening with panic. He glanced around, then jumped down from the fire escape and took off running. Darius let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He stood up and waved to the police cars that were pulling into the alley. "Over here," he shouted. Agent Collins was the first one out of the car. She ran to the fire escape and climbed up to the roof, her face filled with relief when she saw Darius. "Are you okay?" she asked. Darius nodded, his legs shaking with adrenaline. "I'm fine, but Ryan got away again." Agent Collins's expression hardened. "We'll find him, but for now, you need to come with us. You're not safe here." As Darius climbed down from the roof and got into the police car, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Ryan was still out there, and he wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. But Darius wasn't going to stop either. No matter what it took, he was going to bring Ryan down and expose the corruption that had been poisoning his company for years. The police car sped through the city, its sirens wailing as Darius sat in the back seat, his mind racing. He couldn't stop thinking about Ryan, his cold, calculating eyes, the way he'd taunted him from the alley. Darius knew Ryan wasn't going to stop. He was too desperate, too dangerous. And now, with the police closing in, he had nothing left to lose. Agent Collins sat in the front seat, her phone pressed to her ear as she coordinated with her team. "We need to lock down the city," she said, her voice sharp with urgency. "Ryan Mitchell is armed and extremely dangerous. No one gets in or out without being checked." Darius stared out the window, his hands clenched into fists. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd failed. He'd been so close to bringing Ryan down, but now the man was in the wind, and who knew what he was planning next? "We'll find him," Agent Collins said, as if reading his thoughts. She turned to look at him, her expression firm. "But you need to stay out of this, Darius. You've done enough. Let us handle it from here." Darius shook his head. "I can't just sit back and do nothing. Ryan's not just after me. He's after everyone who's been helping me. Emily, the other employees, they're in danger too." Agent Collins sighed, clearly frustrated but understanding. "I get it, but you're no good to anyone if you're dead. Let us do our job." Before Darius could respond, the car pulled up to a secure safe house on the outskirts of the city. It was a small, unassuming building surrounded by a high fence and guarded by armed officers. Agent Collins led Darius inside, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You'll stay here until we find Ryan," she said. "It's the safest place for you right now." Darius didn't argue. He knew she was right, but that didn't make it any easier. As he sat down on the couch in the safe house's living room, he felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The adrenaline from the chase had worn off, leaving him drained and frustrated. He pulled out his phone and texted Emily. "Are you okay? Did you make it home safe?" Her response came quickly. "I'm fine. Just shaken up. What about you?" Darius typed back. "I'm safe for now. But Ryan's still out there. Be careful." As he put his phone down, Darius couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness. He hated being stuck in this safe house while Ryan was out there plotting his next move. He needed to do something, anything to feel like he was still in control. Later that evening, Agent Collins returned with an update. "We've got a lead," she said, her tone cautious but hopeful. "Ryan's been spotted near the docks. We think he's trying to leave the city." Darius sat up straight, his exhaustion forgotten. "Let me help. I know the docks. I used to work there when I was younger. I can get you in without him noticing." Agent Collins hesitated, clearly torn. "Darius, I can't let you." "You don't have a choice," Darius interrupted. "Ryan knows your team. If he sees them coming, he'll bolt. But he won't expect me. I can get close enough to stop him." Agent Collins studied him for a long moment, then finally nodded. "Fine, but you follow my orders, understood? No heroics." Darius nodded, his heart racing with a mix of fear and determination. This was his chance to end this, once and for all. The docks were eerily quiet, the only sound the gentle lapping of water against the piers. Darius moved through the shadows, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of Ryan. Agent Collins and her team were positioned nearby, ready to move in at a moment's notice. As Darius crept closer to a row of shipping containers, he heard voices. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. Peering around the corner, he saw Ryan standing with two other men, their faces obscured by the darkness. They were talking in low, urgent tones, and Darius strained to hear what they were saying. "We need to move fast," Ryan said, his voice tense. "The cops are closing in. If we don't get out of here tonight, we're done." One of the men nodded. "The boat's ready, but we need to make sure no one follows us." Darius's heart pounded. He had to act fast. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to Agent Collins. "Ryan's here. He's planning to leave by boat. Move in now." As he waited for the team to arrive, Darius's eyes fell on a stack of crates nearby. If he could create a distraction, he might be able to buy them some time. He grabbed a loose piece of metal and hurled it across the dock, the sound echoing through the night. Ryan and the men spun around, their eyes scanning the darkness. "What was that?" one of them asked, his voice filled with panic. "Go check it out," Ryan snapped. "We can't afford any mistakes." As one of the men walked toward the sound, Darius slipped around the other side of the containers, his movements quick and silent. He needed to get closer to Ryan, close enough to stop him if he tried to run. But before he could reach him, a loud shout filled the air. "Freeze! Police!" Ryan's head snapped toward the sound, his eyes wide with panic. He turned and bolted, his footsteps pounding against the dock. Darius didn't hesitate. He took off after him, his legs pumping as fast as they could. "Ryan," he shouted, his voice filled with anger. "It's over. Stop running." Ryan didn't stop. He reached the edge of the dock and jumped onto a small boat, his movements frantic as he tried to start the engine. Darius was right behind him. He leaped onto the boat just as it started to pull away, the force of the motion sending him stumbling. Ryan turned, his eyes blazing with rage. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" he snarled, pulling out a knife. Darius raised his hands, his heart pounding. "It's over, Ryan. You're not getting away." Ryan lunged at him, the knife glinting in the moonlight. Darius dodged, but the boat rocked violently, throwing them both off balance. They struggled, their movements awkward and desperate as the boat drifted further from the dock. In the distance, Darius could hear the sound of police boats approaching, their lights cutting through the darkness. But he knew they wouldn't get here in time. This was between him and Ryan. With a burst of strength, Darius grabbed Ryan's wrist and twisted, forcing him to drop the knife. Ryan cried out in pain, but he wasn't done. He tackled Darius, sending them both crashing to the deck. The boat rocked wildly as they fought, the sound of their grunts and the splash of water filling the air. Darius managed to get the upper hand, pinning Ryan to the deck. "It's over," he said, his voice filled with determination. But Ryan just smiled, a cold, twisted smile that sent a chill down Darius's spine. "You think this changes anything?" he said, his voice dripping with malice. "You're too late, Darius. The damage is already done." Before Darius could respond, the boat hit something, a rock, a wave. He didn't know. The impact sent them both flying, and the last thing Darius saw, before everything went black, was the cold, dark water rushing up to meet him. The water was icy cold, shocking Darius back to consciousness as he struggled to the surface. He gasped for air, his lungs burning as he treaded water, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of Ryan. The boat was gone, capsized by the impact, and the dock was just a faint outline in the distance. "Ryan!" Darius shouted, his voice hoarse. But there was no response, just the sound of the waves lapping against the rocks. In the distance, the lights of the police boats grew brighter as they sped toward him. Darius waved his arms, trying to get their attention. "Over here," he shouted, his voice barely carrying over the sound of the engines. As the boats approached, Darius felt a wave of relief wash over him. But it was short-lived. Ryan was still out there, and Darius couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The police pulled him out of the water and wrapped him in a blanket, their voices filled with concern. "Are you okay?" one of them asked. "Where's Ryan?" Darius shook his head, his teeth chattering from the cold. "I don't know. He was on the boat with me, but I lost him in the water." Agent Collins appeared on the scene, her face pale with worry. "We need to find him," she said, her voice sharp with urgency. "He can't have gone far." As the search began, Darius sat on the edge of the dock, his mind racing. Ryan's words echoed in his head. "You're too late, Darius. The damage is already done." What had he meant by that? What was Ryan planning? Before Darius could piece it together, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his hands trembling, and saw a text message from an unknown number. "You should have stayed out of this. Now everyone pays the price." Darius's heart skipped a beat. He showed the message to Agent Collins, his voice filled with dread. "We need to get to the store? Now!" The drive to the store was a blur, the sirens wailing as the police cars sped through the empty streets. Darius sat in the passenger seat, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What had Ryan done? What was waiting for them at the store? When they arrived, the scene was chaos. The store was engulfed in flames, the fire lighting up the night sky as firefighters worked desperately to contain it. Employees and bystanders stood on the sidewalk, their faces filled with shock and fear. Darius jumped out of the car and ran toward the crowd, his eyes scanning for Emily. Emily, he shouted, his voice filled with panic. Where's Emily? One of the employees pointed toward the fire trucks. She's over there. She's okay. Darius pushed through the crowd and found Emily sitting on the curb, her face streaked with soot and tears. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with relief. Darius, she said, her voice trembling. I thought you were... Darius knelt beside her, his heart aching. I'm okay. What happened? Emily shook her head, her hands trembling. Ryan, he came back. He had a can of gasoline. He said if he couldn't have the store, no one could. Darius's stomach dropped. Ryan had set the store on fire, a final act of revenge. Is everyone okay? He asked, his voice filled with dread. Emily nodded, but her eyes were filled with pain. We got everyone out in time, but the store, it's gone, Darius. Everything's gone. Darius looked at the burning building, his heart heavy with grief. The store had been more than just a business. It had been a symbol of everything he'd worked for. And now it was gone. But as he sat there, watching the flames, he realized something. The store wasn't what mattered. What mattered were the people, the employees, the customers, the community. And they were still here. They were still standing. Darius stood up, his jaw tight with determination. This isn't over, he said, his voice firm. Ryan's not going to win. Not like this. As the firefighters worked to put out the flames, Darius and Emily sat together, their resolve stronger than ever. They'd lost the store, but they hadn't lost hope. And as long as they had that, they could rebuild. But as the night wore on, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan was still out there, watching and waiting. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. The sun rose over the city, casting a pale light over the charred remains of the store. Darius stood in the parking lot, his hands in his pockets as he stared at the ruins. The fire had been put out, but the damage was done. The store was gone, reduced to ash and rubble. But as he stood there, Darius felt a strange sense of calm. The store could be rebuilt. What mattered now was making sure Ryan could never hurt anyone again. Agent Collins approached him, her expression grim. We got a lead on Ryan, she said. He was spotted at an old warehouse on the edge of town. We're moving in now. Darius nodded, his jaw tight. I'm coming with you. Agent Collins hesitated, then nodded. All right, but you stay back, understood? This is our job. Darius didn't argue. He knew he wasn't a cop, but he also knew he needed to be there. This was personal. The warehouse was a crumbling, abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. It was surrounded by overgrown weeds and rusted chain-link fences, the perfect place for someone like Ryan to hide. As the police moved in, Darius stayed close to Agent Collins, his heart pounding with every step. Inside, the warehouse was dark and eerily quiet. The only sound was the faint drip of water from a leaky pipe. The police moved cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they searched for Ryan. Darius's eyes scanned the room, his instincts on high alert. He knew Ryan was here. He could feel it. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse. The police spun around, their guns raised, just as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Ryan, his face twisted with rage and desperation. He held a gun in one hand and a small device in the other. Stay back, Ryan shouted, his voice filled with panic. I'm not going back to prison. Agent Collins stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. It's over, Ryan. Put the gun down. Ryan shook his head, his eyes wild. You don't get it? This was never about the store. It was about power. And I'm not giving it up. Darius stepped forward, his hands raised. Ryan, listen to me. This doesn't have to end like this. Put the gun down, and we can talk. Ryan's eyes flicked to Darius, and for a moment, there was a flicker of hesitation. But then his expression hardened. You think you're so smart, don't you? But you're just like the rest of them. You don't understand. Then help me understand, Darius said, his voice steady. What do you want, Ryan? What's this really about? Ryan's hand trembled as he gripped the gun. It's about respect, he said, his voice filled with bitterness. I worked for this company for years, and what did I get? Nothing. No recognition, no respect. So, I took what I deserved, and I'm not giving it up. Darius took a step closer, his eyes locked on Ryan's. You're right. You deserve better. But this isn't the way, Ryan. You're hurting people, innocent people. Is that really what you want? For a moment, Ryan looked like he might lower the gun. But then his eyes flicked to the device in his other hand, and a cold smile spread across his face. You think you've won, he said. But you're wrong. Before anyone could react, Ryan pressed a button on the device. A loud beep filled the air, and the ground beneath them began to shake. Darius's eyes widened in horror as he realized what was happening. He's rigged the place to blow. Agent Collins shouted. Everyone, get out. The police scrambled for the exits, but Darius didn't move. He couldn't leave Ryan here, not like this. Ryan, stop, he shouted. You don't have to do this. Ryan laughed, a harsh, grating sound. It's too late, Darius. This is how it ends. The ground shook again, and the walls began to crumble. Darius knew he had to act fast. He lunged at Ryan, tackling him to the ground just as the first explosion rocked the warehouse. The force of the blast sent them both flying, and the last thing Darius saw before everything went black was the ceiling collapsing above them. When Darius opened his eyes, he was lying on the ground outside the warehouse, his ears ringing and his body aching. Agent Collins knelt beside him, her face filled with relief. You're okay, she said. You're okay. Darius sat up slowly, his head spinning. Ryan, he said, his voice hoarse. Agent Collins shook her head, her expression grim. He didn't make it. Darius felt a wave of grief, but also a strange sense of closure. It was over. Ryan was gone, and the nightmare was finally over. As the police and firefighters worked to secure the scene, Darius stood up, his legs shaky but determined. He looked at the ruins of the warehouse, then at the charred remains of the store in the distance. It had been a long, painful journey, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let Ryan's legacy be one of destruction and hate. He turned to Agent Collins, his voice firm. We're going to rebuild, he said. Not just the store, but everything Ryan tried to destroy. We're going to make it better than it was before. Agent Collins nodded, a small smile on her face. I believe you. As Darius walked away from the ruins, he felt a sense of hope for the first time in weeks. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he knew he wasn't alone. He had his employees, his community, and his determination, and with that he could face anything. The fight was over, but the future was just beginning. Did this story of courage, justice, and resilience inspire you? If so, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more gripping tales of real-life heroes standing up against injustice. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and family, because stories like this deserve to be heard. Together, we can shine a light on the darkness and make a difference. Join us, and let's keep fighting for what's right.